Hey, so while we are wasting some time at home, I thought that I would familiarize myself again with the actual full book version of Charlotte's Web, and I figured it might be a really good way for us to keep in touch as we are preparing and spending time at home and, filling time at home sometimes to maybe go through it chapter by chapter. Also, I think it'll be an interesting thing for maybe everyone at home to hear what the original story sounds like as compared to the script that we're using. It'll teach you a little something about what we call adaptation, right? Where we take a story, what changes do we make to go from this big book version to a small play version, like the one that we're going to perform? Or for those of you who have only seen the movie, or maybe haven't heard this in a long time, or know the old animated movie like the one I grew up watching, you'll see what it's like to go from book to movie. What are the changes that are made? How is the story told differently? Why aren't all the parts that are in the books in the other versions? So this is by no means required. This is something for I'll probably release these, I'm thinking maybe daily, chapter by chapter, every other couple days. We'll see. It depends on how much time I have after getting my kiddos to bed and reading to them. But again, you may have read this or had it read to you when you knew that Charlotte's Web was going to be the play coming up next. And if so, and you've heard it recently, and you don't care to hear it again, then that's fine. You don't have to listen. Of course not. You may have other more important things to do than to listen to Mr. Brown even more. But in the meantime, I thought I might read. Let's start with the first chapter and see how this goes. If you like it, maybe I'll be able to record more. Okay? So, Charlotte's Web. By who? E.B. White. That's right. If you guys saw the middle school play, Stuart Little, same author. Done some really great stuff. And I'll show you pictures when we come across important ones. Every illustration is an important illustration, isn't it? Here's the table of contents. We're going to read chapter 1, Before Breakfast. Okay. Chapter 1, Before Breakfast. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything, so your father has decided to do away with it." "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it? Just because it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Don't yell, Fern," she said, "and your father is right. The pig would probably die anyway." Fern pushed a chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. "Please don't kill it," she sobbed. "It's unfair." Mr. Arable stopped walking. "Fern," he said gently, "you will have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself?" yelled Fern. "This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself?" Tears ran down her cheeks as she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. Got a picture of that. Yeah, that's one fierce little girl, and determined. "Fern," said Mr. Arable, "I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along." "But it's unfair," cried Fern. "The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me?" Mr. Arable smiled. "Certainly not," he said, looking down at his daughter with love. "But this is different. A little girl is one thing. A little runty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I ever heard of. A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said. You go back to the house, and I'll bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle, like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs, changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. Put it on her chair, said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton. There, inside, looking up at her, was the new-born pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. He's yours, said Mr. Arable, saved from an untimely death, and may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. Oh, she whispered, oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect. She closed the carton carefully. First she kissed her father, then she kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother, Avery, came into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand and a wooden dagger in the other. Reminds me of one of my brothers growing up. What's that? He demanded. What's Fern got? She's got a guest for breakfast, said Mrs. Arable. Wash your hands and face, Avery. Let's see it, said Avery, setting his gun down. You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat. Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery, said his mother. The school bus will be along in half an hour. Can I have a pig too, Pop? Asked Avery. No. I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. Arable. Fern was up at daylight, trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. Just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Now let's eat. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. Give him his breakfast, she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. There we go. Isn't that sweet? The school bus honked from the road. Run, demanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out to the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and stared out of the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. Its name is Wilbur, she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania? Wilbur, replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. And that is the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is entitled Wilbur, and I'll drop that one next time. So good night, friends, or goodbye, friends, depending on the time of day. I do miss your faces. I hope to see you soon, and we will read a little bit more of Charlotte's Web.